Hello, welcome to episode 148 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Sid, we've reached the Super Sixes stage of the Under-19 World Cup. It's very exciting. So we've now got two groups in contention for that trophy. We've got Group 1, Australia, India, South Africa, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka and the UAE. And Group 2, England, New Zealand, Pakistan, West Indies, Rwanda and Ireland. So great to see Rwanda getting through to that Super Sixes phase. They were probably the dark horse of the competition, if we can say that, by virtue of beating Zimbabwe. But in terms of the current situation, how's it looking in both groups?
Well, it's actually kind of an interesting situation, I think, because mathematically both groups are in a really similar situation, but in kind of practical, real terms, the first group, Group 1, the one with Australia and India in it, is looking much closer than the England-New Zealand group. So in the England-New Zealand group, let's start there. England and New Zealand are highly likely to qualify because they're almost certainly going to win their last games, based on what we've seen so far. But mathematically, assuming that the West Indies and Pakistan win their games against the other minnows over the next couple of days, mathematically, if England lose their last game, which is against West Indies on Wednesday, because it's much more spread out now, England will go out. So they do need to actually win that game. They can't be totally complacent, but on form, they ought to go through.
Yeah, because we watched England-Ireland yesterday, didn't we? And England absolutely kind of comprehensively walked all over them, in the same way that England won all three of their group matches in the end at the previous stage pretty comfortably. There was a little bit of a wobble maybe against Pakistan, although it's all relative, isn't it? But the other two, they were very, very on top of things. And then against Ireland in their first match of the Super Sixes, it was a bit of a walk in the park. Grace Scrivens hitting the highest individual score of the tournament so far. So get on the Grace Scrivens train, people.
Yeah, she did slightly do a nervous 90s thing, didn't she? She sort of dried up at about 88, 89, and then suddenly batting was a lot more difficult, and then she got out on 93, was it? Yeah. It is the highest score of the tournament so far, and she's looking kind of nailed on to be player of the tournament, isn't she? And the really positive thing actually is that she's playing proper cricket shots to do that. England in their second game in the first stage, I felt they were a little bit complacent. They were a little bit sloggy. They were a little bit we're going to win this easily. We can just go out and play with our eyes closed. The coaches, I feel, must have seen that, and they've really closed that down. And the last couple of games they've looked really clinical. Grace Scrivens has been playing with a very straight bat, playing proper shots. And it's been really great to see, and I think that's going to stand her in really good stead going forwards. I mean, that's kind of the player to watch. She's not necessarily the most exciting player. Liberty Heap's got the big hits, but Grace Scrivens is the one playing the proper cricket shots. I know I always bang on about proper cricket shots, but there's a reason why people bang on about them, because at the next level, slogging across the line is going to leave you in trouble, and that's what Grace Scrivens is not doing. And she's still hitting some big scores, so I've been really impressed with her. Been really impressed with England's leg spinners as well, Groves and Baker. They've been great, and we're seeing some real turn from Baker, which is exciting. The classic English leg spinner is a leg spinner that doesn't spin it, which means as we've said before, they've got a built-in googly, because they've got the one that doesn't turn and the one that doesn't turn the other way. But yeah, no, Baker's really exciting, and Groves has got some really good control as well. So England looking very positive, but there are definitely hard games to come.
And we should also say that in their group, New Zealand have been, again, perhaps a little bit surprising to us, because we don't necessarily know who's coming up in the age group category. New Zealand have also been very, very dominant in the tournament so far, and they are looking absolutely nailed on to make the semi-finals as well.
Yeah, I mean, they are in the same position as England. If they lose their final group game, they're in trouble. But they've got a net run rate of plus 4, which is that's an unprecedented level of net run rate for such a short competition. England's is plus 5, so they've been very, very solid as well. But it's the other group where things are getting really exciting, because we saw that Australia lost that match to Bangladesh, and now India have lost a match to Australia. Now, what's interesting here about the competition format is that losing a match in the Super Sixes stage gives you a much bigger penalty than losing a match in the first stage. That's because although points are carried through, the tiebreaker, if teams are equal, before you get to net run rate, it's the number of games you've won in the Super Sixes stage. So now India have only won, well, at the moment they've won no games in the Super Sixes stage. They will presumably win their last game, so they've only won one game, whereas other teams have the potential to win 2 games in the Super Sixes stage, and therefore, even though they're going to end up on the same points as India, they therefore move ahead of India, despite India having a reasonably positive net run rate compared to some of the others. So the format's kind of working against India, and India really would have been in trouble if Bangladesh had won their match against South Africa yesterday. But South Africa pulled that one out the bag. It was one of those, not a massively high scoring match, but a close one. South Africa won that. That kind of really saved India's bacon, because otherwise India would have been relying on a minnow to beat one of the bigger sides. So it's definitely all to play for, and that's going to possibly go right down to the wire to see who qualifies from that other group.
So what we're seeing here, Sid, is that actually your prediction before the tournament is complete nonsense, because remember what you said? You said India are going to be totally dominant because they've got Shafali Verma and Risha Ghosh, they're just going to walk all over all of these other teams and just be guaranteed a place in the final, and they're going to win it. So basically you were wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean...
I take no pleasure in this, by the way. Actually, I do take a little bit of pleasure.
Look, this could still happen, right? I mean, if you were a betting person, you'd still say that India got a chance of going through. Okay. If India get through to the semi-final, it's perfectly possible that Shafali comes in. India, there's a good chance India end up playing England in the semi-final. Shafali could go. If you read Shafali's, hit 150 off 75 balls in the semi-final, you'd go, yeah. Sure, that's possible. And at that point, if she's done that, and some people at the other end have made reasonable runs, then India could well smash England in the semi-final and then go on to win a final as well. So don't rule it out. But you're right. They've dominated in a couple of games, but they haven't been quite as dominant overall. And the captaincy has been an issue again, hasn't it, Raf? People were saying yesterday after India's match that Shafali was refusing to look anyone in the eye, and it just basically looked like she didn't want to talk to anybody in the world ever again. And as a captain, you can't really do that at international level, don't you? You have to go out and kind of face the press and face the music. You have to, for the sake of your teammates, you have to be able to put on that game face, even if things haven't gone very well.
Well, you're setting an example, aren't you? And that is part of the role of captain. It sounds a bit kind of, public school girlish, but actually you are the face of the team, and you are meant to be setting an example for everyone else. And so if you aren't able to cope with defeat gracefully, then you should not really be the captain. Obviously India will have been disappointed with that match against Australia, to have lost that. They will have really been hoping to have won, but that's just how it goes sometimes. So I think you're right that group is really exciting. But based on what we've seen so far, are we predicting then an England-New Zealand final, Sid?
Well, it's definitely they do look like that could be a good final, doesn't it? It looks like it could be fun. So, and
I think this is really great, because I think actually if your prediction had come true, and if it had been a very one-sided tournament and we had just ended up with Australia v India in the final, then that's not as exciting. That wouldn't have got as many people talking. And what it also shows is that things at age group level are a little bit more open, a little bit more uncertain perhaps, and that's only good for women's cricket. Okay, over to the older generation, because there have been some I'm making them sound like they're about 65. Senior international cricket. There have been a couple of series that have started this week. So we have seen some matches, Australia v Pakistan, and we've also seen the tri-series between West Indies, South Africa and India, that's being played in South Africa as a sort of World Cup warm-up, has also got underway. And there's been a couple of bits of news and controversy surrounding those matches. So let's maybe address some of those, because here at the CRICKETher Weekly, Sid, we just tackle controversy head on, don't we? That's basically 95% of the podcast. Okay, so the big one ahead of the tri-series was actually the South African selection, or should I say non-selection, because Danae van Niekerk was omitted from that squad, and the reason given was that she hasn't passed the required fitness tests. So it's an interesting one, and I believe that they have said that they are still hoping that she is going to be fit and that she will be able to be included in their World Cup squad. Although, you know, time's ticking away. It's only a few weeks, so they're going to have to. She's going to have to get cracking if it's going to change by then. So that's going to be a whole different level of controversy if she's omitted from that squad. But what have you made of that decision, Sid?
Well, I'm going to defer. I'm actually going to defer to Annette Aiken-Drummond, who's a former Scotland player. And I thought what she said on Twitter kind of summed things up, really. She said it's a tough one, and it definitely is a tough one. I agree with her there about that. She says it's a tough one. If you're a full-time professional athlete and you need to meet certain standards to get in the national squad, then you make sure you meet those, and if you don't, you've no one to blame but yourself, in my opinion. And I get where she's coming from, you know, that you know, and this is just something that South Africa, you know, it's not like this is a new thing. We already saw this last summer with Lizelle Lee, exactly the same thing. So, you know, Dane van Niekerk would have been aware exactly what the consequences were for not meeting the fitness requirements, because, you know, nobody's made a secret of that. And, you know, if she's unable to meet them, then it is a really difficult situation. You put the national management in a bind, because the national management will feel that they want to ensure that, you know, we set a good example, that everybody, that especially the senior players, sets a good example to those, you know, further down the pecking order, to go, no, these fitness standards are important. You need to, you know, if you're a professional athlete, you have to meet those standards, and if you can't meet those standards, then, you know, everyone needs to be subject to the same kind of requirements there. So, you know, that's kind of where I'm coming from. What do you think, Raf?
Yeah, I mean, I guess given that we are now a few years into professionalism at that top level, that's when these standards start being standards that you are able to kind of universally apply, and you are able to put high standards and have higher expectations of your players, because ultimately you're paying them to play and you're paying them to meet these standards, whereas previously, you know, in a kind of semi-professional era, then that would have been harder to enforce, I think. It is a difficult one because of the way that we saw South Africa unravel when they were over in England playing in the summer, with that Lizelle Lee controversy ongoing. And obviously Dane van Niekerk was not over in England. She was not even you know, anything near being able to play in that series because she still had this very serious injury. But what we saw was that actually South Africa were, you know, really struggled without some of these key players, and I can just see a situation.
It's almost like they were lacking leadership, right?
Leadership.
Now,
yeah,
that's
exactly. That's what I'm coming to. And actually, where's the point at which somebody like Dane van Niekerk, who is such a good leader and who does bring that kind of that tactical nous and that kind of you know, it's the total opposite of what we were.
People together.
Yeah, it's the total opposite of what we've just been saying about Shafali Verma, actually. You know, in many ways, Dane van Niekerk is such a good role model. Let's not think about fitness for a minute, but think about the way in which she carries herself. You know, that gesture that she made when she won the 100 in giving the trophy to the younger players. Those kind of things are important, and they can't be measured by, oh, well, she didn't do the bleep test in a quick enough time. And that's what South Africa so lacked last summer in England, the English summer. And you can see a situation where it gets to the World Cup, and let's say she doesn't make it for whatever reason, and they disintegrate and they really struggle. And then all of the talk is going to be, well, where's Dane van Niekerk? She would have,
where's the leadership?
Yeah, she would have helped them perform. And so I totally respect what you're saying about standards, and I agree it's difficult to say, okay, we should make an exception for this one player. But on the other hand, with a team like that, where you really are reliant on kind of 3 or 4 players to carry the team, and you are really reliant on, you know, 1 or 2 players to show that leadership, then you so miss somebody like that, and maybe you do actually kind of shoot yourself in the foot slightly. So yeah, it's a tough one, actually. Anyway, let's move on to thinking about Australia v Pakistan, because there's been a little bit of a conversation about some of the scheduling of those games. So obviously the 3 ODIs have now been played, and Australia won all of them pretty comprehensively. Yeah,
you're not telling me that.
No surprises there. No, nobody was less shocked than us. It's been great to see Meg Lanning back, kind of slotting back in so nicely, and Beth Mooney's had a brilliant series. Obviously, I think it was a career best score in the final game. She made 133, I think it was. So that's been really great to see. But the conversation has been, as I say, there's been some discussion about the scheduling, Sid.
Yeah, there has. So I think the first thing to say about the cricket is that we haven't been able to watch any of it in this country. It's not been made available on any networks. It wasn't made available streamed. So we've had to kind of go on the scorecards and the match reports. But certainly some positives from Australia on the field. But off the field, there was a little bit of a negative atmosphere surrounding particularly the match in Sydney, which was scheduled to clash with the Sydney Smash in the men's BBL. Now, Cricket Australia have been putting a lot of marketing into the men's BBL this year. They upped the salaries in order to tempt back some of these big names, these David Warners and so on, to say, come and play in our competition again, and be part of it. They put an awful lot of marketing into this Sydney Smash, and it clashed with the women's game. And there was a lot of talk saying, that basically they let the women down there because they didn't really put anything into the women's game, and it was a small crowd and not really an event for that women's match compared to everything that was, across town at the same time with the men. So but it is a dilemma that we're going to come up against, isn't it? Because going forwards, if women's cricket is going to be a fully professional game, it's going to be very difficult to schedule everything. Given that it's cricket, we have to play it in the summer. We can't go playing it. We can't play it all around the year in every country because even in Australia the winter intervenes. Yeah. There are going to be clashes, unfortunately, but perhaps this one was particularly unfortunate because they managed to make them clash in the same city, so it was exactly the same group of fans they were marketing to, that does it looks a little bit short-sighted and a little bit poor from Cricket Australia that they didn't kind of think ahead about that.
Great. Let's move on to another bit of news that has emerged this week. There was an interesting article by Matt Roller on Cricinfo about salaries in the 100, but it particularly centred around men's salaries in the 100. So there were quite a few England men's players last year, I believe, who didn't end up playing in the 100, who pulled out at the last minute, basically. And it looks like the ECB have concluded that that's because the financial rewards for them weren't large enough. So this article by Matt Roller says that in 2023 players on all format central contracts are going to be paid £125,000 to play the full season, or the same fee on a pro rata basis if they make themselves unavailable for a portion of the season. So essentially they're going to be being paid quite a bit more as an incentive to play in the competition. What do you think, Sid?
Well, it's exactly the same thing, ironically, that we just spoke about with the Australians having, shoveled more money towards the men to tempt the likes of David Warner to play in their Big Bash. The ECB are finding that, the rewards that that they were offering for the 100 just weren't enough, and that a lot of their top players were going, thanks, but no thanks. It's just not that big a deal. Now, what's really interesting to me here, actually, though, is that I think this is a harbinger of things to come, because this is what's going to happen in the women's game as well. And if you think it's not going to happen, then look at the men's game now, because for once it's the men's game leading the way on one of these things. So what's going to happen in the women's game in exactly the same way in 4 or 5 years' time is that somebody like a Sophie Eccleston or an Nat Siver or whoever, some of these top players are going to go, you know what, I just made $1 million playing in the women's IPL. I'm tired. I need a rest. I'm going to pass on the 100, thanks. And it would be totally reasonable of them to do that. That would be a rational thing to do. So that's what happens when you get like one tournament providing a vastly out of kilter amount of money to the players. They're going to prioritise that one tournament. And in exactly the same way, if another tournament can't, provide those financial incentives, the ECB are already seeing it with the men. They're going to see it with the women in the future as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think we talked a few weeks ago about actually the ECB saying that they were going to freeze salaries in the 100 this year, both for men and for women. So this somehow they found some money down the back of the sofa to pay some of these.
Some money down the back of our sofa, Raf.
Have a look.
No, sadly not. Sorry.
Well, that's disappointing because if we found any, then we'd be using it to pay the women a bit more. But anyway, the point is that the official claim was that actually, no, we want to freeze salaries in the 100, and now they've found this money and they're going to pay the men a bit more, and that's disappointing to see. But potentially, that if they don't then pay the women anymore, then as you say, they're gonna have equally no incentive to turn up and play in this 100 tournament because they will be able to go and earn a lot of money playing elsewhere. And that's actually quite worrying for the women's 100 because the research that we've done at Bournemouth University that I think I've talked about on the pod before actually suggests that one of the reasons why people are more attracted to the women's 100 than the men's 100 is because they really feel that they're watching the world's best players. And they don't feel like they are watching them in the men's 100 because often they aren't, because players are pulled out, and so they're watching Bob from down the road instead of Ben Stokes or whoever else, and that's disappointing for them. So that's kind of one thing that the women's 100 has got at the moment that the men's 100 doesn't have. So if in a couple of years' time the women's salaries have stayed the same, and as you say they can go off and earn the big bucks in the women's IPL, then that's not going to be the case anymore, and it could then reflect badly in terms of the crowds that the women's 100 is able to attract. So it's something that the ECB have really got to be thinking about and planning for, I think.
Yeah.
And finally this week, Sid, we've had a really interesting message from Beth on Twitter, and we like to try and respond to viewer messages whenever we can, so I thought that we would read some of this out and have a bit of a discussion about it because she makes a really interesting point. She says, as a fan of the Southern Vipers, I've been fortunate enough to see them play in various venues, but especially the Ageas Bowl. And the Ageas Bowl recently sent out emails saying, buy your early bird Hampshire Hawks tickets. I wrote back and said, thanks, but I want Vipers tickets in a package deal, and I'm not interested in the men's game. And they replied, so Hampshire replied, saying, due to the Southern Vipers being a regional side, we do not offer a package to games as they are played at multiple venues within the region. So you can get tickets for the Vipers at the Ageas Bowl, but only when they go on sale in March, not as an early bird package deal. And if you want to go and see the Vipers at Hove, you then have to buy tickets from Sussex. You can't buy them from Hampshire. And Beth goes on to say, for the same reason, you can't see match information on the Hampshire app, although Hampshire are very happy to use Vipers in their advertising, she says. Somehow this regional franchise approach means I don't get to give the Vipers the support that a Hawks fan can give to the Hawks. It all feels sort of half in and half out for supporting the women's game. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is a result of the fact that it can't be beyond the wit of man to create tickets that are give you access to all of the games and to create season tickets, and that would seem like the sort of no-brainer thing to do. But this is, I guess, partly a result of the fact that the ECB haven't really they've put all of the investment in the regional system into the playing setups, and that's a real positive. But they've put a lot less investment into kind of setting up the sort of the other infrastructure around these things. That they're barely even businesses. They work a little bit with their host counties, and some of them they're sharing marketing people with the host counties, or the marketing's done by the team manager. And there's some good stuff going on with people and individuals are working hard, but a lot of joined upness isn't there. So I know that Sunrisers have some season tickets available. I'm actually looking on Sunrisers' website this morning, but in fact only for juniors. So Sunrisers have been able to make an arrangement where juniors can buy a season ticket, which covers games across the region, but you can't buy a senior Sunrisers season ticket either. And things like season tickets are, again, it's like you get money up front if you're a club, and those people are then incentivized because they've bought in, literally bought into it. They're incentivized to come to the games. You get more people at the games. So it does seem that it's something that they really should have been able to set up. And it strikes me, you've only got like 3 counties involved. It's only 2 counties involved really, and it's Sussex and Hampshire with the Vipers. You'd only have to get those 2 to kind of sit down and talk about, how can we create a season ticket, and it should be a 20-minute conversation.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's a real pity that it's not something that's happened.
Yeah, it would just be about a proportion of how many games are at each of the venues, and then you work out how to distribute the season ticket venue revenue. It seems like it should be perfectly straightforward. I think this is a consequence of the fact that the ECB insisted that the regions be set up separately to the counties. It's a totally new structure that's sort of been half imposed on the county structure and half is meant to stand alone, and nobody quite knows where they are. We know, for example, that they refused to let Surrey call the South East Stars the Surrey Stars as they were in the KSL, because they said, no, you need to stand alone as a region. But that means that when you're marketing the team, it's very difficult to then align the marketing and have staff who are ultimately totally dedicated to that team, but also employed by Surrey or Hampshire or whoever.
Yeah, no, and they haven't given them any budget for this, so they've said you need to be a standalone business, but you also need to basically lean on one of your host counties. So most of the marketing for the Vipers is done by the Hampshire people.
Yeah.
Most of the marketing for the South East Stars is done by the Surrey people. And they're kind of doing it on top of their day jobs, if you like. And the ECB, are effectively leaning on the clubs to kind of do that, but by not providing the money that they need to set up as proper kind of spectator-focused businesses. And it is a dilemma with the regional system. It's because going forwards, they need to be spectator-focused businesses, because we can't just, we talked about this before, we can't run cricket the way in this country that tennis runs themselves, where Wimbledon funds everything. So the 100 can't fund everything the way that Wimbledon does. We need these kind of other domestic teams to be able to actually make money going forwards, and that means they need to be proper spectator-focused businesses. And what Beth makes is a really good point, that we're not there yet, and there's still a lot of work to do to get there.
Great, well, let's wrap up there. Thanks as ever for tuning in, and we'll see you in a week's time. Bye.
Bye.